Siddhi Hung Nga Hung Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hung Nga Hung Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hung. Hello, welcome to my Sunday Dharma talk. I am Tseten. Today we're going to do the 27th Sutta of the Agganna Sutta in the Digha Nikaya in our series of 34 talks on the Digha Nikaya. So we're coming to the end of our series of 34 talks on the Digha. The Digha is, of course, the first book of the Sutta Pitaka. And as always, please ask your questions as we proceed if you have anything, if anything comes to mind, when it's uppermost in everyone's mind rather than waiting till the end. And I put some information about me in the chat. So this is going to be a fairly, relatively, a relatively short sutta. It's only about 9 pages long, and I have about 30 minutes of material about it. So if you do have questions, perhaps that can lengthen the talk a little bit. So, the title of the sutta in Pali is the Agganna Sutta, and I'm translating that as the Discourse on Origins. And Sawati, also known as Shravasti, a prosperous trading center located on the bank of the Achirawati, now the West Rapti River, and the capital of the ancient kingdom of Kosala, which of course we've encountered before in our talks, was one of the 6 largest cities in India at the time of the Buddha, with a population of 57,000 households. The Buddha spent 24 rainy seasons in Sawati during his lifetime, which makes this the city he spent the most time in during his ministry. Vaseta and Bharadwaja are the 2 young Brahmins in Sutta 13, which we've, of course, already covered, where you might recall they were arguing about right and wrong paths. In this sutta, they are now living amongst the monastics, hoping to become monastics themselves. In the evening, the Buddha comes out of Migara's mansion, a sort of pleasance, having spent the day there in secluded meditation. And the image behind me is actually the ruins, what's left of Migara's mansion in Sawati. So he begins walking up and down in the shade. Again, another reference to walking meditation, which we find quite frequently mentioned in the Pali Canon. Most likely a reference to walking meditation. I'm not sure there's ever any description of walking meditation as such. It's just persistent references throughout the Pali Canon to the Buddha and others walking up and down. Vaseta, noticing this, suggests to Bharadwaja that they follow the Buddha in the hope of hearing a Dharma talk from him, and they fall into step with him as he walks up and down. The Buddha asks Vaseta and Bharadwaja if they get any grief from the other Brahmins for hanging out with the Buddha's monastics. They affirm that they do receive grief from the Brahmins, who accuse them of abandoning the highest, fairest, purest Brahmin caste, who consist of the children of God. God referring, of course, to Brahma. Instead, they have gone over to the base caste of the Buddha's disciples, described as shaveling petty ascetics, servants and dark fellows, born of Brahma's foot. The Buddhist Sangha, of course, made no distinction between the castes, so to the Brahmins, the Sangha was a mixed-race rabble with whom one should not associate. There are several color references in this sutta associating the Brahmins with a fairer and therefore a better caste of people. This Indian view of race is consistent with the Aryan migration theory, in which fairer Indo-European migrants came down from the northwest and assimilated into a local, darker Aboriginal people who were looked down upon. This, of course, very controversial now, this Aryan migration or Aryan invasion theory, but some form of it still seems to be the mainstream view. And in any case, regardless of what you think of any of this, there is no suggestion in the Pali Canon that the Buddha shared this racial prejudice. The Buddha replies that such an attitude shows that the Brahmins have forgotten their ancient tradition, an oft-repeated assertion of the Buddha. You will recall from other talks that the Buddha has identified himself as restoring the primordial Brahmanic tradition to its original purity and perfection, identified with the ancient Vedic rishis, as well as a prehistoric lineage of perfected Buddhas. The Buddha points out that Brahmin women menstruate, they become pregnant, they give birth, and they suckle their babies, just like the women of other castes. Therefore, the statement that Brahmins are born from the mouth of Brahma is a myth. As a lie, such as an assertion earns much demerit, the Buddha says. Here, the Buddha reveals his rationalistic side that was so strongly criticized by the Vedic traditionalists. The Buddha gives an account of the castes, which he lists off as warriors, the Kshatriyas, that's the Pali, Khatiyas, pardon me, that's the Pali form, Kshatriya is the Sanskrit, priests, the Brahmins, traders, the Vaisas in Pali, Vaishalis, I think it is, or something like that, Vaishalis in Sanskrit, and the workers, the Suttas, the Shudras in Sanskrit. The noble or warrior caste is placed above the Brahmins in this list, you will note. This was their original and proper place in northeast India at that time, which the Buddha very likely identifies with the ancient tradition aforementioned, whereas the Brahmins had usurped the place of the Khattiya caste in the west, and there they were the dominant group. In the Pali Canon, the Brahmins are generally portrayed as subject to the military rulers, although clearly favored as they often fulfilled such roles as governors of towns, which they practically owned. The Buddha points out, however, that all of the castes are equally subject to karma, both negative and positive. You will notice that once again, alcohol is not mentioned in the list of what we otherwise recognize as pansil, the 5 precepts including not killing, not stealing, etc. And we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go into it again here. Therefore, both bright and dark qualities, good and bad karma, are scattered indiscriminately among the 4 castes. Therefore, the claim of the Brahmins to supremacy is disproved by the fact that anyone of any caste who destroys the corruptions that bind one to rebirth may become emancipated through super-knowledge and thus become an arhat, who is above all castes, all of the castes. In the same way as the Shakyans submit to Pasenadi, the king of Kosala, so too does the king submit to the Tathagata. The Buddha points out that all of the members of the Sangha, although they all come from different births, names, clans, and families, are all ascetics, followers of the Shakyan. This is also how they should refer to themselves if asked, he says. The Pali word is Sakyaputta, literally sons of the Shakyan clan. It could also mean children of the Shakyans, or even children of those who are able, the literal meaning of Shakya. The Buddha thus elaborates this statement, quote, I am a true son of blessed Lord, born of his mouth, born of Dhamma, created by Dhamma, and heir of Dhamma, unquote, thus appropriating to himself and the Dharma the role of Brahma in the Vedic tradition. One often reads in the literature that the English term Buddhist does not correspond to a word that the Buddha used, but Buddhist, literally one concerned with the Buddha, is not that far different from Saryaputta, or Sakyaputta, pardon me, Sakyaputta, son of the Shakyan. So we may say that Buddhists are Shakyaputtans. And I'm just going to, I have a bit of a cold, I'm just going to blow my nose. Give me one moment and I'll be back. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So we may say that Buddhists are Shakyaputtans. So in fact, there is a word approximating the word Buddhist in the canon. The Buddha says that we may refer to them the Buddha says that they, that is the monastics, may refer to themselves this way because the body of Dhamma, the Dhammakaya, designates the Tathagata. This is a rare explication in the Pali Canon of the meaning of the word Tathagata, the mysterious epithet of the Buddha that means something like he who traveled the path. And we've discussed this at some length in a previous talk as well, so I'm not going to go into it further here. This term, also translated truth body, this is referring to Dhammakaya, also translated truth body or reality body, is one of the three bodies of the Buddha in Mahayana Buddhism, representing the highest unmanifested, inconceivable aspect of a Buddha, the Buddha-ness of the Buddha, if you like. Yet another example of the Pali origin of a Mahayana doctrine, or what is ostensibly a Mahayana doctrine. And I've talked about this in past talks as well, so I'm not going to elaborate it further here. The Buddha glosses this phrase as the body of Brahma, become Dhamma, or become Brahma. Those are all quotes. The body of Brahma, become Dhamma, or become Brahma. Meaning that the Buddha, as the Tathagata, has realized the highest truth. The other two aspects are the ecstatic body, the Sambhogakaya, and the created body, the Nirmanakaya. The Dharmakaya is the most inscrutable, immortal, and timeless essence of a Tathagata. We have discussed Buddhist cosmology in previous talks, including in connection with Sutta 1. Here the Buddha describes the contraction of the universe when most beings are reborn in the Abhasara Brahma world, corresponding to the attainment of the second jhana. Not going to go elaborate this too much because we've discussed Buddhist cosmology in previous talks also. The Abhasara realm refers to the radiant devas who are our own origin as human beings prior to being degraded to the level of rebirth on the earth plane. This is the realm next above the Brahma world. The Buddha describes the residents of this world as, quote, mind-made, feeding on delight, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious, unquote, and also long-lived. After a very long time, the universe begins to expand again, much as described by the so-called Big Bang theory of modern physics. During the period of this expansion, most of the beings from the Abhasara realm are reborn in this world. Here they abide in the same fashion, mind-made, feeding on delight, self-luminous, moving through the air, glorious. This description is reminiscent of Plato's bisexual luminous spheres, that, he says, are the original nature of human beings, and implies a primordial, pre-hominid occupation of the earth by these luminous aerial beings. And I have had occasion to refer to these phenomena in the Pali Canon before. The Buddha proceeds to tell Vaseta a cosmogony, a myth about the origin of the world and life. The earth was originally entirely covered by water, and everything was blinding darkness. There were no sun, moon, stars, night, day, months, fortnights, years, seasons, or gender. Interestingly, scientists believe that the earth was originally a water world, almost entirely covered by water, about 2.5 billion years ago. The only life on earth at that time was sexless algae and bacteria. After a very long period, and now we're discussing the Sutta again, after a very long period, a skin formed on the surface of the water, like the skin that forms over hot milk as it cools. In this passage, the Buddha demonstrates that he understands that the cause of the one-world ocean at that time was the deep mantle of the earth, which was 200 degrees hotter than it is now, and also that it was cooling. As the deep mantle cooled, the continental crust formed, much as described in the Sutta. And now I'm quoting from an article on this phenomenon, on the science behind this phenomenon of a water world era for the Earth. If you want to see the actual article, you can find the reference on the blog post corresponding to this talk. So quoting from that article, just during the water world era, any oxygen produced by photosynthesizing bacteria would have been quickly used up through reactions with decaying organic matter in the oceans. When the newly emerged land eroded, it produced sediment that washed into the oceans and buried the organic matter, preventing further reactions with oxygen, the scientists believe. As a result, oxygen was allowed to build up in the atmosphere and enable oxygen-breathing life to evolve and flourish. The eroded sediment would also have fertilized the oceans with phosphorus, an important nutrient for living beings, unquote. And that article was published in 2008, and I didn't actually note the when that research was done, but it is quite recent research. The Pali Canon calls this phosphorus skin rasa patawi, literally earth sap. I believe in Walsh's translation he calls it savory earth, but the Pali is rasa patawi, and my translation is earth sap. Interestingly, in view of the subsequent reference to luminance, phosphorus emits a faint glow when exposed to oxygen. It is also an essential ingredient of the human genetic material, DNA and RNA. Up until this time, human beings were still like devas, even though they inhabited our universe. One of these devas tasted the earth sap and discovered that it was sweet like pure wild honey. This was the origin of craving. As a result, their self-luminance disappeared. As it did so, the sun and the moon revealed themselves, and night, day, months, fortnights, years and seasons all appeared, restarting the evolution of the universe. Over a very long period, the devas continue to feast on the earth sap, and as they do so, their bodies become coarser and more material, and their appearance begins to acquire individual differences. Beauty and ugliness arise, leading to pride, which in turn leads to the disappearance of the earth sap. And the connection is lost in me, however, perhaps as the beings become more material, the more refined earth sap becomes intangible to them. That's the only explanation of the connection that I can come up with. In any case, in place of the earth sap, a mushroom-like fungus appears. And a la Terence McKenna, one is tempted to suggest that this might be a psychedelic, but the text says nothing to substantiate such an association other than that it is a food. So the devas start to feast on the fungus instead of the earth sap, and their bodies continue to coarsen. This process of degeneration continues over eons. Each time the existing food disappears and a new one appears. Thus, creepers, bamboo, and rice come after the fungus. When rice becomes the predominant food, male and female sex organs appear, and men and women begin to copulate. This is really the point at which human beings, as we know them, appear in this story. People build houses in order to create the privacy they need in order to have sexual relations, which are shameful to others. Thus, the concepts of property and territoriality arise. Next, people begin to exploit the wild rice and damage the environment. Sounds familiar. As a result, the rice fields are divided up into fields and boundaries. Because of dividing the rice fields up into plots, people begin to steal each other's property, and all kinds of civil strife appear, which in turn require repressive measures to suppress it. Because of this civil strife, the people appoint someone to keep order in exchange for a share of the rice. This person was called the Mahasamata, literally the great appointee, and was the precursor of the Katiya caste. Note that the premise here then is that the primordial state of humanity postulated by the Buddha is the direct democracy of the people, the original non-self-contradictory state. The Katiya caste and the title of Raja, or king, also appear, which together constitute, as I said, the Katiya, the first or original caste. This proto-historical step-by-step causal account of the progressive devolution of beings, culminating in the appearance of property, territoriality, government, civil order, and disorder, etc., is very similar to a specialized application of the Paticca-samuppada, the doctrine usually translated as dependent origination, which we've discussed also in a previous talk, so I'm not going to go into that in further detail. The Buddha identifies the origin of each of the castes as a process of continuous degeneration. The Brahmins arise out of ethical judgment, meditation, and scholarship. The merchant or trader class rise out of sexuality and the settled householder life. And the artisans or workers rise out of hunting and gathering. Finally, the ascetics appear out of all of the castes in response to fundamental ontological dissatisfaction, or dukkha. This is presented as a kind of historical development. All of the castes reap the consequences of negative and positive karma alike, and all can attain emancipation alike. Therefore, the ascetics are above all of the castes. The Buddhist view of the tendency to degeneration is in striking contrast to the Western evolutionary bias, which tends to see the arrow of time progressing inevitably toward ever more positive and successful states. One might say this is the ontological theory underlying Americanism, for example. The Buddhist view is more akin to the scientific perspective that time is generally entropic, but with negentropic modes or phases. However, properly speaking, Buddhism sees time as cyclical, alternating between periods of devolution and periods of evolution on both human and cosmological scales. Finally, the Buddha quotes the Brahma, Sanat Kumara. The Sanskrit is Sanat Kumara or Sanat Kumara. I guess it's Sanat Kumara, technically. Sanat Kumara and Sanat Kumara. We've heard about Sanat Kumara before. He is one of the four mind-born sons of Brahma. Quote, "The Kati is best among those who value clan. He with knowledge and conduct is best of gods and men." That's the quotation from Sanat Kumara that the Buddha agrees with. The Buddha affirms that the Sangha stands in relation to the spiritual life as the Katiyas stand in relation to society. It is clear, however, and we should make this distinction, that the Buddha himself is not one of those who value clan, so he is not actually affirming the supremacy of any caste. Okay, that concludes the talk for today. As I said, it's relatively short. Before we proceed with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings, does anyone have any questions or a discussion concerning anything in the Sutta? Okay, I don't hear a great outcry. Jospe says, to become Brahma if one follows Buddha's word. I don't see a question there, so I don't know how to respond to that. Eric Hunter, what creepers as a food source? Yes, I know what you're thinking. And when I saw mushroom and then right after I saw creepers, I had the same thought. But there is no more information in the Sutta than that. The creeper is, of course, the word that Walsh uses in his translation, And we could go, I didn't do this, but one could go into the Tipitaka. In fact, maybe if you'd like to do that as a special project, some homework to do for next week. Go into the Tipitaka at the Pali text at tipitaka.org. Find that word that corresponds to Walsh's translation of creeper in the text, and then look it up in a few Pali dictionaries and see if you can find out anything about what kind of creeper is being referred to. But I suspect you're going to find the word is fairly generic and probably just means creeper or vine or something like that. Let me see. Robert Duke Driscoll says, evolution is the ontological basis for the emergence of Americanism. Well, not just Americanism, but this is the doctrine of progress, which I would say is really the axiom of American society, which of course is derived from the Western liberal Enlightenment. So, yes, I would say that evolution is, the doctrine of evolution does underline Americanism in a number of ways, starting with the doctrine of the idea of progress, but also now the almost survivalism that has beginning to dominate American thinking, the obsession with success and failure, with competition, with survival of the fittest doctrines, which are leading the United States toward, in my judgment, towards fascism. So yes, I would say evolution is the primary axiom of American historical society and the American dream, the ideology of Americanism. K.J. Englewood says, you mentioned two different states, that is, spiritual states, early in the talk. Can you describe them in more detail? Two different states. Can you remind me what states those were? Because I don't recall exactly. I could look back through the text. Or we could have a conversation around the campfire in a circle on that point. Because I don't recall exactly what two states I referred to. Joe Stospe says, my question is about how this combines with other statements of the Buddha. He surpassed the Brahma, but to become Dhamma is to become Brahma, the creator of this samsaric experience. How can I combine these? The way I read it, and I'd have to look at the text again to confirm that definitively, but my reading of the text was that the Buddha is taking the Vedic idea of Brahma, and he is identifying it with Dhamma. And he is identifying, at the same time, he's identifying himself with Dhamma as the realizer of Dhamma. So what he's actually doing is setting himself up and setting the Dhamma up, and therefore setting up his doctrine as the substitute for Brahma in his anti-Vedic teaching. That's how I interpreted it. Okay, K.J. England can't remember, and I don't want to take the time now to just look through the text and spend some time reading the beginning of it. So why don't we take that to the circle, and we can discuss it further. And then I can spend some time just take a look at what I wrote and see what I actually said. So I'll take that question to the circle. And any of the other things, if anyone wants to discuss at greater length, we can take that to the circle as well. So I'm going, Jaibop says, so see that we are set up for fascism. That's my opinion. I'm not arguing that is a necessary Buddhist view. I would argue that my view of Americanism is a Buddhist view of it. Whether the United States actually becomes a fascist society or not, and also to what degree, that's my personal view based on my observation of history, contemporary events, and certainly applying based on the application of Buddhist principles to a critique of Americanism and its place in the world today. But I certainly am not saying that Buddhism necessarily implies that the United States will become a fascist society. that would be taking my view too far. Eric Hunter asks, is that because oligarchy wasn't a word during the Buddha's time as a critique of politics? Oh, I'm sure it was. I've talked about this before. In fact, I talked about the nature of the society of Northeast India at the time of the Buddha and compared it to the nature of our own society in previous talks. And oligarchy was one of the political structures that were struggling amongst the 16 Mahajanapadas at that time. There were hereditary monarchical kingships. There were military despotisms, expansionist military despotism. Sometimes they were the same thing. The king was a an expansionist military despot. There were nascent democratic forces operating mostly at the municipal level in those states, and sometimes at the federal level. They weren't necessarily democracies as we would understand them today. They were sort of proto-democratic aristocracies. The Buddha's own father was one of these people. He's generally used to be described by translators as a king. That view has now been fallen into disfavor, and the Buddha's father, Suddhodana, is generally regarded as an elected chieftain. And I believe that it wasn't even hereditary, because after Suddhodana died, it was another family, not a Gota member of the Gotama clan, who took over the quote-unquote throne. Was really a poor word. And then, of course, Kosala was destroyed in any case. So, through an act of genocide. So there was there were multiple states, different political ideologies, some leaning towards the fascist, some leaning towards the democratic. A lot of wars, a lot of military expansionism, a lot of social discord. Very much like our own society, in fact. Which is, of course, well, I'm not going to flog the Americanism horse any further. Any further any questions before we proceed? And I am going to the circle and visit Atoll Sim, which is the home of my group, the Dharma Transmission to the West group, Zangzung. So anyone who wants to continue this discussion there is welcome to do so. However, if there's no further questions, let's proceed with the dedication of merit. Whatever understanding, whatever positive forces come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much, everyone, for yet another opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. If you would like a copy of the note card of this talk, please send me an I am now, and I'll be happy to send you a note card. Namaskar.